The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor, and 10-year-old Emma Winters stood in the center of the wreckage, tears streaming down her face. Her tiny fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. This was the 7th nanny in 6 months, and like all the others, she was already packing her bags. "I'm done," the woman whispered, her voice trembling as she grabbed her suitcase and walked out of the $50 million penthouse without looking back, leaving behind the little girl whose heart had been broken long before she learned how to break everything else. Emma's father, Daniel Winters, stood at the doorway of his home office, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and a grief he'd never fully processed. And he knew in that moment that all the money in the world couldn't fix what was broken inside his daughter, or inside himself. It had been 2 years since the accident, 2 years since his wife Claire had died in a car crash on a rainy October night, and in those 2 years, Emma had transformed from a joyful, bright-eyed child into a silent storm of anger and sorrow that no therapist, no tutor, no nanny could reach. Daniel had tried everything: the best child psychologists, elite boarding schools, private tutors with impeccable credentials, caregivers trained in trauma and childhood development. But Emma saw through all of them, saw the pity in their eyes, the professionalism in their smiles, the way they treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. She would scream, throw things, lock herself in her room for days, refuse to eat, refuse to speak, and when she did speak, her words were laced with a bitterness that seemed impossible for someone so young. Daniel didn't know what else to do. He was a man who had built an empire from nothing, who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals with a single signature, but he couldn't reach his own daughter, couldn't find the words to tell her that he was drowning in the same ocean of grief, that every time he looked at her he saw Claire's eyes, and it both healed him and destroyed him all over again. One cold November morning, after another sleepless night, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He would take Emma with him to work, to the flagship hotel and restaurant of his hospitality empire, the Winters Grand, a place he'd built with Claire back when they were young and dreaming together. Emma sat in the back of the black town car, staring out the window with empty eyes, her small frame swallowed by an expensive coat that was too big for her, her blonde hair uncombed, her face pale and expressionless. "You'll stay in my office today," Daniel said gently, glancing at her through the rearview mirror, but she didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that he'd spoken. When they arrived at the Winters Grand, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, greeting Mr. Winters with respectful nods while stealing curious glances at the small, silent girl trailing behind him. Daniel settled Emma in his office with books, tablets, art supplies, anything to keep her occupied, but within an hour, she'd wandered out, slipping past his assistant and down the hallway like a ghost. She found herself in the restaurant's kitchen, a place alive with heat and noise and motion, and for a moment she just stood there, watching the controlled chaos, feeling strangely comforted by the fact that everyone was too busy to notice her. But someone did notice. Her name was Grace Chen, a 28-year-old waitress who had been working at the Winters Grand for 3 years, saving every penny she could while sending money back to her younger sister who was in college. Grace had her own story of loss she'd raised, her sister alone after their parents died in a house fire when Grace was just 19, and she carried that loss not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her, like warmth from a flame. Grace was wiping down tables in the empty dining room when she saw the little girl standing near the kitchen doors, looking lost and small and somehow ancient all at once. "Hey there," Grace said softly, setting down her cloth and approaching slowly. "The way you might approach a wounded bird. Are you looking for someone?" Emma's eyes snapped up, defensive and cold. "No, leave me alone." But Grace didn't leave. Instead, she knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level, and she smiled, not the fake, pitying smile Emma had seen on so many faces, but a real smile, genuine and unafraid. "I'm Grace," she said simply. "And I'm guessing you're pretty bored, huh?" Emma stared at her, suspicious, searching for the angle, the agenda, but all she saw was kindness. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice sharp. Grace shrugged. "Because I've been bored before. It's the worst. Want to help me fold napkins? I know it sounds boring too, but I can make it interesting." Emma almost said no, almost turned and walked away. But something in Grace's eyes stopped. Herma bait. It was the fact that Grace wasn't trying too hard, wasn't treating her like broken glass, wasn't acting like she was a project to be fixed. "Fine," Emma muttered, "but only because there's nothing else to do." Grace led her to a corner table where stacks of white linen napkins waited, and she began to show Emma different folds, the classic pyramid, the bishop's hat, the rose, and as her hands moved, she talked, not about therapy or feelings or how are you doing, but about small, real things. The customer who came in every Tuesday and ordered the same meal, the pigeon that lived on the roof and had one crooked foot, the way the afternoon light came through the restaurant's tall windows and made everything look golden. Emma listened, and slowly, without realizing it, she began to fold napkins too, her small hands mimicking Grace's movements. "My mom used to do this," Emma said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She loved fancy napkins," she said. "They made even regular dinner feel like a celebration." Grace's hands stilled for just a moment, but she didn't make a big deal of it, didn't flood Emma with questions or sympathy. "She sounds like she knew how to find magic in small things," Grace said gently. "That's a special gift." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back hard. "She's dead," she said bluntly, as if daring Grace to react. "I know," Grace said quietly, "and that's the hardest thing in the world." Emma looked up sharply. "How do you know?" Grace met her eyes with steady honesty. "Because I lost my parents too. I was older than you, but it still felt like the world ended. Some days it still does." For the first time in 2 years, Emma felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked, was finally letting in a sliver of light. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, and her voice was so small, so young, so achingly vulnerable. Grace reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Emma's. "No," she said honestly, "but you learn to carry it differently, and you don't have to carry it alone." Emma didn't pull her hand away, and they sat there in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by folded napkins. To people who understood loss in a way that needed no explanation. From that day forward, something shifted. Daniel noticed that Emma asked to come back to the hotel the next day, and the day after that, and soon it became routine. She would sit with Grace during slow hours, helping with small tasks, talking about everything and nothing, slowly coming back to life in ways that startled and humbled her father. Grace never asked for anything in return. She simply showed up, consistent and kind, treating Emma not like a billionaire's daughter or a broken child, but like a person worthy of time and attention and genuine care. Weeks passed, and Emma began to smile again, small smiles at first, then real ones that reached her eyes. She started talking to her father at dinner, started showing him the napkin folds Grace taught her, started asking questions about the hotel and his work, about her mother, about memories she'd been too afraid to touch. Daniel watched in amazement as his daughter returned to him piece by piece, and he knew it was because of Grace, this quiet, humble waitress who had done what no expert could do. One December evening, as snow fell softly outside the restaurant's windows, Daniel approached Grace as she was finishing her shift. "I need to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for Emma, for what you've done." Grace looked surprised. "I haven't done anything special, Mr. Winters. I just spent time with her." "That's exactly what she needed," Daniel said, and there were tears in his eyes now, unashamed. "Everyone else tried to fix her, but you just loved her." You saw her. Grace smiled softly. She's easy to love. She's brave and smart, and she's been carrying something too heavy for too long. She just needed someone to help carry it for a while. Daniel took a deep breath. I want to offer you a position as Emma's companion, her mentor. I'll triple your salary, provide benefits, whatever you need. Please. But Grace shook her head gently. Mr. Winters, I appreciate it, but I can't accept money for being Emma's friend. That would change everything. What she and I have, it's real, because there's nothing transactional about it. The moment you pay me to care about her, it becomes a job. And she'll feel that. Daniel stared at her, humbled and ashamed, realizing how even in his gratitude he'd tried to solve a human problem with money. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, Grace said. Just keep showing up for her. Keep talking to her. Keep letting her feel what she needs to feel. That's what she needs from you. It was a gentle truth, but it hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. He realized he'd been so busy trying to fix Emma's pain that he'd never actually sat with her in it, never let her see his own grief, never been vulnerable enough to say I'm broken too, and I don't know how to do this either. That night, for the first time since Claire died, Daniel went into Emma's room, and instead of saying goodnight from the doorway, he sat on the edge of her bed. Emma, he said softly, I need to tell you something. She looked up at him with those eyes so like her mother's. What? I've been a terrible father, he said, and his voice cracked. Not because I don't love you. I love you more than anything in this world. But because I was so scared of my own pain that I couldn't help you with yours. I lost your mother too, and it broke me, and instead of letting us be broken together, I tried to fix you so I wouldn't have to feel it. I'm so sorry. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and then she did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She reached for him, and Daniel pulled her into his arms, and they both cried, deep, wrenching sobs that emptied out all the grief they'd been holding in separate corners of their enormous, lonely house. I miss her so much, Emma whispered into his shoulder. I miss her every single day. Me too, Daniel said. Me too, sweetheart. And it's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad. We don't have to pretend we're fine. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, finally grieving together, finally letting the walls down, finally being honest about the enormity of their loss. And in that honesty, something began to heal, not the wound itself, which would always be there, but their ability to live with it, to hold it together, to find moments of light, even in the darkness. Christmas came, and Daniel did something he hadn't done since Claire died. He put up decorations, not throughout the whole house, but in the living room, simple and warm. Emma helped, and as they hung ornaments, she told him stories about Grace, about the things they talked about how Grace was saving money to help her sister become a doctor. Daniel listened, and an idea formed in his mind. On Christmas Eve, Daniel invited Grace to their home for dinner, not as an employee, but as a guest, as a friend, as family. Grace arrived nervous and overwhelmed by the grandeur of the penthouse, but Emma ran to her and hugged her tight, and all the nervousness melted away. They had dinner together, the three of them, and it was simple and warm and filled with real laughter. The kind that comes from genuine joy rather than polite obligation. After dinner, Daniel handed Grace an envelope. This isn't payment, he said carefully, and it's not charity. It's a scholarship. I'm establishing it in Claire's name, and your sister is the first recipient. Full ride through medical school, no strings attached. Claire always believed in helping people build their dreams, and I've lost sight of that. You've reminded me what really matters. Grace's hands trembled as she held the envelope, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Winters, I can't. You can, Emma said, taking Grace's hand. You helped me. Let us help your sister, please. Grace looked at this little girl who had become so dear to her. at this father who was learning to be present and real, and she nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing us." "Thank you for seeing her," Daniel said, gesturing to Emma. "For seeing what everyone else missed, that she didn't need to be fixed. She just needed to be loved." As snow fell softly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the three of them sat together, an unlikely family bound not by blood, but by something deeper, by loss and healing, by kindness and genuine connection, by the understanding that sometimes the most broken people can help each other become whole. Months later, the Winters Grand launched a new initiative, the Claire Winters Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships and support for young people who'd lost parents, and mental health resources for children and families navigating grief. Emma became involved, speaking at events with a wisdom beyond her years, telling her story honestly, helping other kids feel less alone. Grace eventually went back to school herself, supported by Daniel's mentorship, and became a counselor specializing in childhood grief and trauma. And Daniel, he learned to lead with his heart instead of just his mind, to value presence over presence, to understand that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the depth of our connections and the courage to be vulnerable. Emma never forgot the day a waitress knelt down to her level and treated her like a person rather than a problem. It became the foundation of how she moved through the world, with empathy, with honesty, with the understanding that everyone is carrying something heavy. And sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is simply to say, "I see you, I'm here, and you don't have to carry it alone." The billionaire's daughter, who no one could handle, had never actually needed handling at Al-Sheed, just needed someone brave enough to sit with her in the pain, to not rush her healing, to show her through quiet, consistent presence that love doesn't fix everything, but it makes everything bearable, and sometimes that's more than enough.